Um, so I want you to think about like the most intense relationship conflicts you've ever experienced.
Oh, yeah, the ones that really stick with you.
Right, the ones that literally kept you awake at night, staring at the ceiling.
Hmm.
So here's a question for you. What hurts more? Is it someone standing right across from you, like totally losing their temper, face red, just screaming at the top of their lungs?
Which is terrifying.
Exactly, it's awful. Or, and this is the alternative, is it someone who just goes completely, entirely quiet? Like someone who turns their back, looks right through you, and just acts like you have simply ceased to exist on this earth.
It is honestly a phenomenal psychological riddle
Hmm.
because, if we were to poll 100 people who were just sitting in a calm, rational state of mind,
Yeah.
the overwhelming majority would definitely pick the screaming.
Yeah, I mean, logically, screaming feels like the bigger threat, right?
Right, because screaming is overt aggression. It registers to us as a tangible physical threat. You can see it, you can hear it.
It's undeniable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when we look at the neurology, like when we actually scan the human brain while it's in distress, the brain violently disagrees with that logical assumption.
Wow, really? Violently disagrees.
Yeah, the tension between our logic and our biology is basically the entire foundation of our deep dive today.
And that's exactly what we're getting into. We are exploring a fascinating document we received titled Why Silence Docs, which digs into the dark psychology of weaponized silence.
It's a really heavy topic, but so crucial.
It is. And, the goal here isn't just to validate that being ignored hurts. I mean, we all know it hurts.
Oh, well,
Right.
absolutely. Everyone has felt that sting.
Right. Our mission today is to actually uncover the physiological and psychological mechanisms that make silence such a devastating tool of manipulation.
We really want to take a look under the hood, so to speak.
Exactly. We want to see what a lack of communication physically does to your nervous system. And more importantly, equip you with the insights to tell the difference between someone who is just taking healthy space and someone who is actively using the void of sound to control you.
The clinical consensus on this is, honestly, it's quite sobering.
How so?
Well, deliberate silence,
Mhm.
whether we're talking about a classic silent treatment after an argument or, stonewalling in the middle of a conflict, or even the modern phenomenon of ghosting it, mimics the sensation of social death.
Social death. That's a really intense phrase.
It is, but it's accurate. It initiates this cascading anxiety response. It targets the deepest, most primal fear a human being possesses, which is the fear of complete exclusion.
I've been trying to find a framework to really visualize this for you, like why the absence of something hurts so profoundly.
Right, because it's hard to articulate pain when nothing is actually happening to you.
Exactly. And the most accurate parallel I keep coming back to is the phenomenon of phantom limb pain.
Oh, that's interesting. The somatosensory aspect of that is a really solid comparison.
Yeah.
How are you applying that to communication exactly?
Well, think about it like this. If someone hurls an insult at you, or even just raises their voice, it operates like a physical wound. It's a localized strike.
Right, you know exactly where it hit.
Exactly. You can point to the specific word they used and say that right there is what caused the damage. But when someone suddenly just cuts off communication, there's no localized injury.
There's nothing to point to.
Nothing at all. There's no text message you can screenshot to prove hostility. There's no raised voice to complain about. It's just a complete void.
Yeah, just empty space.
Right. Yet the agony of that missing connection, that psychological phantom limb, where that relationship or that daily check-in used to be, it radiates real pain. The distress is generated entirely by the absence of the expected input.
The reason that phantom limb comparison works so perfectly on a neurological level is because of how the brain maps expectations.
Oh, like it's literally expecting something that isn't there.
Exactly. So in amputees, the brain's sensory map still expects signals from the missing limb. And when it doesn't get them, the cross-wiring creates severe physical pain.
That's wild.
It is. And socially, we are wired in the exact same way. When an established connection suddenly goes dark, your brain does not perceive that silence neutrally.
It doesn't just think, oh, they're probably busy.
No, not at all. It doesn't assume the other person is just staring peacefully out a window. It interprets the sudden withdrawal of a baseline connection as an immediate existential threat.
So it basically just hits the panic button.
It hits the panic button so hard that it activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
Okay, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, what is that exactly?
This is where the biology gets incredibly validating for anyone who has experienced this. That specific region of the brain, is the exact same area that processes the distress of physical pain.
Wait, really? The exact same area?
Literally the same. So when you burn your hand on a stove, one part of your brain identifies the location of the burn, but the anterior cingulate cortex is what generates the actual subjective suffering.
It's the part that makes you say, ouch, make it stop.
Exactly, yes. And functional MRI studies on social exclusion demonstrate that being deliberately ignored lights up that exact same distress center.
Wow. So the human brain literally cannot differentiate between the distress of a broken bone and the distress of a broken social bond.
From a survival standpoint, there is honestly no difference to your brain.
That's incredible.
If we look back through our evolutionary history, human beings could not survive outside the tribe. If you were ostracized, if the group stopped acknowledging you, it basically meant you were going to starve or be eaten by a predator.
Right, because you can't survive alone in the wild.
Exactly. Complete social exclusion was a death sentence. And our modern brains are still running on that ancient hardware.
So even though we're in modern society, our bodies react like we're in the Stone Age.
Right. When your partner or a close friend gives you the silent treatment, your rational mind might know, okay, I am safe in my apartment. But your nervous system firmly believes you have just been cast out into the wilderness to die.
Which completely explains the frantic physiological reaction people get.
Oh, absolutely. The racing heart, the tight chest.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like you were completely losing your grip on reality because someone you cared about was ignoring you, you need to hear this. Your reaction wasn't a character flaw.
Not at all.
You weren't being overly dramatic. Your body was responding appropriately to what it perceived as a lethal threat.
That is the absolute crucial baseline we have to establish today. The agony of being ignored is fundamentally an information crisis.
An information crisis. I like that phrasing.
You are plunged into the dark. You don't know the exact nature of the infraction you've supposedly committed. You have no roadmap for how to repair it.
Right, because they won't talk to you.
Exactly. And you have absolutely zero timeline for when the punishment will conclude.
And that information crisis creates what behavioral psychologists call a vicious loop.
Yeah, the vicious loop. This is so important.
This is basically the engine of the manipulation. It starts with the silence, which generates a massive amount of uncertainty.
Because the brain functions as a prediction machine. It constantly runs simulations of what is going to happen next, mostly to conserve energy.
Right, so we don't have to overthink every little thing.
Exactly. But when the environment becomes totally unpredictable, like a partner who normally speaks to you suddenly treating you like a ghost, the brain's predictive models fail.
And that failure registers as anxiety.
Extreme anxiety. The anxiety spikes, which leads directly to the third phase of the loop.
Which is compliance.
Yes, compliance. The internal pressure of that anxiety becomes so physically intolerable. The tight chest, the racing thoughts, the inability to focus on work or anything else.
Yeah, you just can't function.
Right. The victim will do almost anything just to relieve that pressure. They need the other person to speak just to regulate their own nervous system.
And this is the sinister brilliance of the tactic, isn't it?
It really is. It's incredibly dark.
A skilled manipulator doesn't have to raise a single finger to control you. By strategically withholding communication, they basically outsource the abuse to your own nervous system.
You become your own interrogator.
Wow. You sit there aggressively cross-examining your own memory.
Exactly. You're searching for any possible misstep. You're blowing minor imperfections completely out of proportion, all in this desperate attempt to solve the puzzle of why you were being punished.
It totally reminds me of a software glitch.
A software glitch? How so?
Well, think about a computer program. If a program is running and it requires a specific data input to proceed to the next step, but that input is suddenly severed, the program doesn't usually just quietly go to sleep.
Right, it doesn't just calmly shut down.
Exactly. It gets stuck in a loop. It keeps throwing an error code, pinging the server over and over, demanding the missing data.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, the system exhausts its own processing power until the computer physically overheats and the entire operating system just crashes.
That perfectly illustrates the cognitive load of weaponized silence. Your prefrontal cortex is pinging the environment for the missing data.
It's looking for the reassurance, the text back, even just eye contact.
Right, and every time it gets nothing, the error signal amplifies. Eventually, cognitive fatigue sets in.
You literally crash.
You do. You can't work, you can't sleep, and your boundaries totally crash. You end up apologizing for things you didn't even do.
Just to get the system back online.
Exactly. You accept blame for a conflict that wasn't your fault, simply to reboot the system and get the relationship functioning again.
Okay, so once we understand that immense biological vulnerability, we have to look at how that vulnerability is actively harvested.
Right, we have to map out the behavior.
We have to look at the specific behavioral patterns that turn an absence of sound into an actual instrument of control.
And this is where clinical institutions like the Cleveland Clinic draw a very hard line.
Because silence itself isn't inherently toxic, right?
No, definitely not. But it crosses into abuse when it is deliberately deployed to diminish, punish, or force a partner to chase.
So what does that look like in practice? What's the first tactic?
The most recognizable manifestation of this is the post-conflict blackout.
The blackout. Yeah, that sounds rough.
It is. This isn't just someone saying they need a minute to cool off. This is a punitive, total withdrawal after a disagreement.
Like complete radio silence.
Complete. The individual might refuse to answer calls, ignore direct questions, or, and this is especially brutal, if you share a living space, they might look right through you as if you are literally a piece of furniture.
The atmosphere in a house when someone is doing that is suffocating. I mean, the air physically feels heavier. You can hear every dish clink, every floorboard creak.
It's an environment of active hostility wrapped in passive behavior.
Active hostility, yeah.
The psychological objective here is subjugation. By plunging the environment into a blackout, they are forcing you to sit in the void.
They're using the vicious loop against you.
Exactly. They're banking on the loop we just discussed. They want you to marinate in the anxiety until your desperation to restore peace completely overrides your sense of justice.
Or your sense of fairness regarding whatever the original argument was even about.
Right. The original issue just fades away because the silence is so loud.
And the end result of that blackout is tragic, honestly, because it works. You eventually break.
You do. It wears you down.
You surrender your position, lower your standards, and essentially beg for their forgiveness just to alleviate the somatic pain of being erased.
It's incredibly damaging to your self-worth.
But there's another variation of this that doesn't even wait for the argument to end, right? It happens right in the middle of the conflict.
Yes, mid-conversation stonewalling. This is a fascinating and incredibly destructive dynamic.
What does that look like?
Well, you might be expressing a vulnerability, trying to explain why something hurt your feelings, and the other person simply disengages.
Just shuts down right there.
Right there. They might pick up their phone and start scrolling, turn the volume up on the television, or literally stand up and walk out of the room without saying a single word.
Oh man, the message there is almost louder than if they had shouted it.
It really is.
By physically dismissing themselves, they are essentially communicating, your internal world, your feelings, and your needs are so insignificant to me that they don't even warrant a verbal response.
I hold the keys to this interaction.
Right. I decide when we connect, and I decide when you are dismissed.
We really have to look at the long-term compounding effect of that specific behavior.
Because it's not just a one-time thing, usually.
Rarely. When someone stonewalls you consistently, you undergo a process of emotional isolation. You learn, through repeated psychological conditioning, that the penalty for speaking up is immediate abandonment.
So you just stop speaking up.
Exactly. To avoid the pain of the stonewalling, you begin to self-censor. You shrink yourself.
You stop bringing up issues altogether.
Yes. You create a relationship where the manipulator operates with total impunity because you've been conditioned to never ever question them.
It essentially trains you to participate in your own silencing.
It does. It's a very dark psychological trap.
It is incredibly dark. Now, I want to pivot to a third variation that gets a lot of attention, especially in the context of dating or newer relationships.
Ah, yes, the modern dating scene.
Right. We're talking about the slow fade or intermittent ghosting. This is the use of delayed communication, taking days to respond to simple messages to keep the other person perpetually off balance.
It's very common these days.
It is. But I really want to push back on this one for a second because I feel like we have to anchor this in reality.
Okay, let's hear the pushback.
People live incredibly demanding lives, right? We are all balancing careers, family crises, burnout, and just overflowing inboxes.
Absolutely. Modern life is chaotic.
I know I have personally forgotten to text people back for 48 hours simply because my brain was full. I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone.
Right. It's just human error.
Exactly. So how is a listener supposed to differentiate between someone who is genuinely drowning in their obligations and drops the ball and someone who is deploying a delayed text as a calculated psychological operation to keep them insecure?
It's a really valid question because I was just busy. is the most common defense mechanism.
It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card.
It is. But if we look closely at the behavioral patterns, the distinction actually becomes very clear.
Okay, how so?
It is rarely about the objective measure of time passed.
Yeah,
It's almost entirely about the dynamic that the delay creates.
the dynamic.
Right. Genuinely busy people have a consistent baseline. When they finally do have time to connect, they are present. They are apologetic for the delay.
Like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, work was crazy.
Exactly. And they attempt to meet you halfway. The connection feels secure, even if it's sparse.
Right. The fundamental safety of the relationship is intact. They don't leave you feeling like you did something wrong.
Precisely. But when silence is weaponized through a slow fade, it functions as a form of intermittent reinforcement.
Intermittent reinforcement. Okay, break that down for us.
Think of B.F. Skinner's behavioral experiments with pigeons.
The Skinner box.
Right. If a pigeon pecks a button and gets a pellet every time, it's calm. It knows the rules. If it never gets a pellet, it eventually just stops pecking and moves on.
That makes sense.
But if it gets a pellet randomly, sometimes after 2 pecks, sometimes after 50 pecks, the pigeon becomes completely obsessed. It will frantically peck itself to exhaustion.
Wow.
The manipulator acts exactly like that random dispenser. They give you just enough warmth to hook your attachment, and they pull back into silence.
So the goal isn't just to be absent. The goal is to watch you scramble to figure out why they are absent.
Exactly. It forces you to constantly audition for their attention.
Oh, man. Audition for their attention. That's so accurate.
You find yourself overanalyzing a 2-word text message. You're rewriting your own replies a dozen times to make sure you sound perfectly breezy and undemanding.
Like, hey, no worries, with perfectly calculated exclamation points.
Yes. The underlying message they are sending with their erratic silence is, I like you better when you are insecure and working hard to keep my attention.
That reframes the entire concept of ghosting. It's not a passive failure to communicate. It's an active management of someone else's insecurity.
It's highly active, even though it looks passive.
Which brings up a really critical question about the mechanics of this abuse.
Okay, what's the question?
Why choose silence? I mean, if someone is prone to abusive or controlling behavior, yelling, criticizing, or overt intimidation seem like much more direct routes to power.
They are more direct, yes.
So what strategic advantage does a manipulator gain by choosing to do absolutely nothing?
The advantages are actually profound. And the primary one is plausible deniability. Weaponized silence is power without evidence.
The lack of fingerprints.
Precisely. Overt abuse is undeniable. If a partner throws a glass against a wall or calls you a derogatory name, that is an objective event.
Right, you can't deny a broken glass on the floor.
Exactly. You can point to it. You can tell a friend exactly what was said, and the friend will validate your reality and say, that is unacceptable.
But how do you prove the malicious intent of nothing?
You can't. The manipulator can simply shrug and say, I didn't do anything, I was just quiet. You're being paranoid.
And because there is no concrete evidence to point to, you can't even get validation from your own support system.
This is a huge issue for victims.
Right, because trying to explain the suffocating weight of a 3-day silent treatment to a friend who hasn't experienced it often makes the victim sound like they're the one being unreasonable.
Or overly demanding, like, oh, he just needed space, relax.
Exactly. It isolates the victim perfectly.
It is psychological warfare by omission. And because there is no overt attack to defend against, the manipulator reaps the second massive strategic benefit.
Which is?
They force the victim to do all the emotional labor.
Oh, because nature abhors a vacuum, and the human brain cannot tolerate an unresolved narrative.
Yes, the psychological term for this is the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Right. We remember uncompleted tasks or unresolved situations far better than completed ones. A sudden silence is the ultimate unresolved situation.
So your brain just gets stuck on it.
Exactly. The abuser expends 0 calories. They simply withdraw and wait. Meanwhile, the victim is sprinting on an emotional treadmill.
They are analyzing past conversations, trying to interpret micro-expressions.
They're drafting apologies for imagined slights and basically constructing the entire case against themselves.
To use a historical psychology reference, it's totally like the still face experiment.
Oh, conducted by Dr. Edward Tronick. That is a brilliant application of that research.
Yeah, the one where he had mothers sit across from their infants and play normally, just cooing and smiling.
Right.
And then suddenly the mother was instructed to completely drop her expression and offer a totally blank, silent still face.
Have you seen the footage of that?
I have, and it is heartbreaking. Within seconds of the mother going blank, the baby tries to fix it.
The baby takes on the entire burden.
Yeah. They smile, they point, they screech to get a reaction. When the silence continues, the baby's distress escalates rapidly.
They start physically flailing.
Right. They start crying, their body language just collapses, and they completely dysregulate. The infant is doing 100% of the work to try and bridge the gap that the mother artificially created.
It's hard to watch.
It really is. And as adults experiencing a silent treatment, we are basically just complex variations of that infant frantically trying to reanimate a blank face.
That is exactly right. And by making the victim do all the work, the manipulator successfully achieves their ultimate goal.
Which is establishing a rigid power hierarchy.
A battle of attrition. It is entirely about attrition.
Whoever cares the least wins.
Essentially, yes. In any conflict, the person who can withhold connection the longest, the person who appears to need the other the least, assumes the dominant position.
They hold all the cards.
By maintaining the silence until you break, they are hardwiring an unspoken rule into the foundation of the relationship.
What's the rule?
The rule is, my emotional autonomy is absolute. Your need for me is a liability. I am the gatekeeper of the relationship, and I decide when you are allowed to have emotional oxygen.
That concept of emotional oxygen is such a potent way to understand the hierarchy.
It really paints a clear picture.
It does. In a healthy relationship, both people are breathing the same air. But the stonewaller essentially takes all the air out of the room and hoards it.
They hold their breath, and they watch you choke.
They stand there, completely fine, watching you hyperventilate. They derive a sense of omnipotence from watching you gasp for the basic clarity and connection that they are effortlessly withholding.
It is fundamentally an addiction to control fueled by the other person's visible dysregulation.
Okay, hearing all these mechanics laid out like this, it paints a very grim picture. It almost makes silence sound like a radioactive material.
It does sound terrifying.
But we have to be incredibly careful here because we know objectively that silence is a natural, necessary component of human interaction.
We all need quiet sometimes.
Right. So we need to build a diagnostic framework. We have to give you, the listener, the tools to analyze the quiet moments in your own life so you don't start pathologizing healthy boundaries.
Or normal emotional processing. The clinical distinction here is paramount.
Because not all silence is bad.
Not at all. In fact, intentional pausing is actually a hallmark of high-level emotional intelligence.
Okay, explain that.
Well, relationship researchers like the Gottman Institute talk extensively about physiological flooding during conflict.
Flooding, that's when you just get overwhelmed.
Right. When your heart rate exceeds roughly 100 beats per minute during an argument, your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, literally shuts down.
So you can't even think straight.
You can't. You lose access to rational thought and empathy. In that flooded state, silence is not just healthy, it is mandatory to prevent massive relational damage.
Because if you speak, you're just going to say something awful.
Exactly.
So we need to clearly contrast the anatomy of healthy silence versus toxic silence.
Healthy silence is categorized by intention and transparency. It is deployed as a shield to protect the relationship, not a sword to attack the partner.
How does that look in a real conversation?
Functionally, it is clearly communicated. A healthy partner will say something like, I am too angry to speak constructively right now. I need an hour to calm down, and then I want to resolve this.
It provides the vital data that the brain needs to avoid the vicious loop.
Yes, exactly.
It gives a reason and it gives an endpoint.
It signals that the connection is paused, not severed. It demonstrates a fundamental respect for the other person's nervous system.
Whereas toxic silence...
Toxic silence, as we've established, is characterized by ambiguity. It is open-ended, it provides no reassurance, no timeline, and its primary utility is the confusion it generates.
I want to insert a bit of reality here, though.
Please do.
Because when we talk about the perfectly communicated boundary, like I need an hour to calm down, it sounds great in a textbook.
It does, but real life is messy.
Real life is so messy, and I know my own flaws. When I get truly overwhelmed in an argument, when that physiological flooding hits, I don't always have the presence of mind to deliver a perfectly scripted disclaimer.
Most people don't in the heat of the moment.
Right. I tend to just freeze. I shut down entirely, my eyes glaze over, and I retreat inward to protect myself from saying something catastrophic.
It's a classic trauma or stress response.
But in that moment, I'm not giving a timeline. Am I accidentally weaponizing silence? Does that biological freeze response make me an abuser?
This is exactly where we separate the internet pop psychology from actual clinical nuance. A flawed execution of a boundary does not equate to manipulation.
Okay, that's a relief.
Getting overwhelmed and experiencing a stress response like freezing is a biological event. Weaponizing silence is a calculated strategy.
So how does the partner on the receiving end tell the difference between my flooded freeze response and a calculated punishment?
We evaluate the aftermath.
The aftermath.
What happens when the storm passes? When your nervous system regulates and the flooding subsides, what is your next move? Do you re-engage?
Do you come back to the table?
Exactly. Do you say, I'm sorry I shut down, I was totally overwhelmed, but I'm ready to listen now? A person in a freeze response wants to reconnect once they feel safe.
Right.
A manipulator who is weaponizing silence will remain closed off long after the anger has passed, specifically because they are enjoying the leverage the silence gives them.
They aren't trying to heal anything.
No, they have no interest in repair. They're interested in submission.
That is the definitive metric, intent and repair. Healthy space is a tool you use to manage your own internal state.
Yes.
Toxic silence is a weapon you use to manage someone else's behavior.
If the prolonged quiet in your relationship consistently leaves you feeling desperate, insecure, and begging for basic validation, and the other person seems entirely unbothered or even slightly amused by your distress, you are dealing with a tactic, not a trauma response.
All right, so we possess the diagnostic tools now. We understand the evolutionary biology that makes silence hurt. We recognize the specific tactics, and we know the strategic benefits the abuser gains.
We've covered the mechanics.
Right. So the final phase of this deep dive is tactical defense. When you realize that the unseen weapon has been deployed against you, how do you protect your mind and disarm the manipulator?
The psychological literature points to several counterintuitive strategies. And the first one is, honestly, the hardest behavioral modification to make.
Which is?
You have to stop chasing.
Oh man, that goes against every instinct in your body.
It completely contradicts your biology. Your brain is screaming that the only way to alleviate the phantom limb pain is to get the other person to respond.
Right, so you send the multi-paragraph texts.
You leave the voicemails.
You escalate your emotional output, hoping to finally trigger their empathy.
But pouring more energy into a black hole doesn't fill the hole. It just depletes you.
It totally drains you.
In fact, it actively reinforces the abuser's behavior. Remember the Skinner box?
Yeah, the pigeon.
Your panic is the pellet in the Skinner box. By frantically chasing, you are confirming that their tactic is highly effective.
You're feeding the machine.
You are showing them that they have total control over your emotional state. So the first line of defense is radical behavioral inhibition.
Radical behavioral inhibition, meaning just stop doing it.
Yes. You have to recognize that your panic is an involuntary biological reaction, but their silence is a deliberate choice.
Right.
You cannot control their choice, but you can choose not to audition for their respect.
I love that phrase, audition for respect. You are allowed to desire clarity, but the moment you find yourself performing, compromising your values, or pleading just to be acknowledged as a human being, you have to hit the brakes.
You have to step back.
Which leads to the second defense mechanism. You have to name the tactic.
There is profound neurological power in categorization.
How does that work?
Well, when you are the target of silence, your amygdala is highly active. You are processing fear, shame, and rejection. You internalize the silence as a referendum on your worth.
You think, I am being ignored because I am unlovable.
But when you name it,
When you consciously label the behavior, like, this is stonewalling, this is a recognized manipulation tactic, this is a power play.
exactly. When you do that, you shift the blood flow in your brain. Research by Matthew Lieberman on affect labeling shows that putting feelings or behaviors into words actually decreases amygdala activity.
Oh, wow. So just saying it out loud calms your brain down.
Yes, it engages the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. You move from emotional distress to cognitive evaluation.
You take this vague, overwhelming cloud of personal shame and crystallize it into an objective observation of their poor behavior.
Right. It stops being about your flaw and starts being about their deficit.
It strips the tactic of its mystique.
Hmm.
And once you evaluate it, you can move to the third strategy, which is critical for surviving the gaslighting effect of silence.
Yes. Protect your reality.
Because the vacuum of silence is designed to make you rewrite history in their favor, right? So you need an external anchor.
The human memory is highly malleable, especially under stress. If the silence drags on for days, you will start to doubt your own perception.
You'll wonder if maybe your tone was too harsh or if you are demanding too much.
To combat this erosion of your reality, You must document the facts.
And we aren't talking about writing a dramatic diary entry here. We are talking about keeping a ledger.
Precisely. Write down exactly what occurred before the silence began.
Like, I calmly asked them to help with the dishes. They rolled their eyes, walked out, and haven't spoken to me in 48 hours.
You need that objective record to look back on when the cognitive dissonance sets in. You need to be able to ground yourself and say, no, I am not crazy. The punishment does not match the event.
That makes total sense. Or, alternatively, sharing the objective facts with a grounded, emotionally healthy friend serves the exact same purpose.
Yes, you need a trusted third party to provide reality testing.
Someone to confirm that the behavior you are experiencing is objectively unacceptable.
Once your reality is anchored, you are in a position to deploy the fourth strategy, which is setting firm operational boundaries.
And we really need to clarify what a boundary actually is because the term gets misused constantly on the internet.
It does. It's become a buzzword.
A boundary is not a rule you place on the other person. You can't just say, my boundary is that you aren't allowed to ignore me.
No, that's an attempt to control them, which usually fails.
A true boundary is about your resulting action. It is communicating your limits and the steps you will take to protect those limits.
In the face of weaponized silence, a boundary sounds something like this.
I understand you might need space right now. I am open to discussing this when you are ready to communicate respectfully.
However, I will not participate in a dynamic where I am subjected to silent punishment. If this continues, I will be taking space of my own.
Exactly. You state your terms objectively without anger, and then you step back. And the hardest part of a boundary is the enforcement. What happens when you state that clearly and they just continue to stare blankly at you? Or continue to leave you on read for another week?
Then the boundary must escalate to distance.
Physical and emotional distance.
Yes. The psychological literature is unflinching on this point. You cannot build a functional, secure connection with someone who uses your nervous system as a playground for their own ego.
You just can't.
If they repeatedly choose the weapon over the relationship, you have to limit their access to you.
Which brings us to the ultimate diagnostic question. This is basically the synthesis of everything we've discussed today.
It's the final lens through which you must evaluate the person employing the silence.
You have to ask yourself, do they want power or do they want connection?
It is the defining dichotomy of all relational conflict. Human beings who are genuinely interested in connection will make mistakes.
Of course they will. We all do.
They will get defensive, they will argue poorly, they might even briefly shut down. But the gravitational pull of their character always brings them back to repair.
They want to heal the rupture because the connection is more important to them than winning.
But people who are driven by a need for power operate on an entirely different axis.
For the power-driven individual, the rupture is the goal.
Yes. Keeping you off balance, keeping you guessing, and watching you diminish yourself to appease them is how they regulate their own self-esteem.
They use the silence to intentionally starve you of emotional oxygen so that they can feel like a god when they finally decide to let you breathe again.
Understanding that completely removes the burden from the victim.
It really does, because your job as the listener is not to decode their silence.
It is not to crack their shell.
Or to love them out of their toxic defense mechanisms. Your only responsibility is to recognize the tactic, protect your own biology from the vicious loop, and enforce the boundaries that keep you emotionally safe.
We have journeyed through an immense amount of psychological terrain today.
We really have. We've looked at the dual nature of silence. We know that in a healthy context, a pause is a profound tool for emotional regulation.
It's a space where empathy can catch up to anger.
But we've also stripped the mask off the dark side of that coin. We've seen how the absence of words can be engineered into a phantom limb pain.
How it triggers the same neural pathways as physical trauma.
And how it is systematically used to dismantle a partner's reality and self-worth without leaving a single fingerprint.
The core truth we want you to carry forward is this. Never confuse someone else's calculated refusal to communicate with your own lack of worth.
Their silence is a strategy. It is not your character flaw.
And to that end, I want to leave you with one final reframing of the power dynamic.
Okay, let's hear it.
Throughout this deep dive, we've analyzed how the manipulator uses the void to feel omnipotent. They sit in the silence, believing they hold all the cards while you struggle.
Right.
But if we flip the lens and analyze the psychology of the abuser, a very different picture emerges.
What does the silence actually say about them?
It reveals a profound, almost tragic, internal fragility.
Fragility.
Yes. True relational strength, genuine power, requires vulnerability. It requires the courage to articulate your feelings, the resilience to hear your partner's grievances, and the emotional stamina to navigate the messy reality of a shared conflict.
It takes guts to actually talk it out.
It does. If an individual is so unequipped for genuine connection that they have to resort to psychological starvation tactics just to feel secure, if they have to systematically shrink you down to size just so they can feel tall, that is not the behavior of a powerful person.
It's the ultimate defense mechanism of a weak ego.
It is the refuge of a deeply insecure psyche that is utterly terrified of engaging on equal footing.
That is a masterclass in perspective. The next time you find yourself standing in the freezing cold of someone else's intentional silence, feeling that desperate urge to apologize for simply existing, remember what you've learned today.
Their refusal to speak isn't a testament to your unworthiness. It's a confession of their own incapacity.
Turn on the lights, recognize the tactic, protect your peace, and stop chasing someone who has made the active choice to hide. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.